Okay, so welcome everyone to the Circle Oversight Working Group on Catalyst Circle problem sensing. And I'll just share a screen if I can. There we go. Okay, so to recap, what we've done so far in meeting one, we looked at an overview of the problem statement rubric, which actually is supposed to be spelled with a C, not a K, actually. The yeah, I realized too late, but there you go.
I thought maybe it was the British spelling.
Yeah, it's the exotic European spelling, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
I don't think anyone is going to be too twisted up about it.
Yeah, it's the East European spelling, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll co-sign it.
Anyway, that originated with, as we discovered, with Governance Alive, and we kind of looked at that rubric, and then we started to think about how that aligned with what we're doing at the moment, and also what it relates to, and also what comes out of that. Like if you are putting a problem to Circle, is it going to come? What's the product of that? Is a proposal going to come out of that? Is a challenge going to come out of that, or is a specific decision going to come out of it, like a parameter or a process decision? We looked at problem ownership, like who should own the problem. Should it be one person? What should their responsibilities be in respect of the problem? We touched on taxonomy, like, do we need standard terms for what things are? What prioritized problem, issue, community issue. What word soup, rather than have a word soup, that what are we talking about? So maybe problem is the shorthand for that. That was the first meeting. The next meeting, we focused more on, we focused in on how we could describe the rubric, how it can be structured. And we took what Governance Alive gave us, and we tried to sort of make that much more plain and straightforward. So we said, okay, it's importance to catalyst mission. That's kind of like the obvious thing, the gap between the current state and the solution. And finally, how to measure it, quantitative and qualitative metrics. But also here we discussed last time, what's the minimum to get a problem onto the problem board? And we decided it should be just these two, not necessarily the third one. Okay, the reason being is because, I'm going to detail here, is because the first two deal with the identification of the problem, and the measurement of the problem is more an issue that could be discussed within a Circle meeting, once it's on the problem backlog. The value of solving the problem here is where we're at now. And that's really the value stroke measurement. So you identify a problem, and that problem, has relevance is important to address because it's related to the mission of Cardano, and there's a current state that's been identified and a future solution state that's been identified. So now the question is, how should there be a standard, or a very simple standard, to how to measure that problem in the context of it being on the problem board? Okay, this is before we move on to the problem board itself, by the way. The other thing that occurred to me is all questions that come up recently, which I just want to clarify, is did we decide that it's entirely up to each community, like each subcircle, for example, what is a problem? Well, what goes forward as a problem? And I just maybe want to start discuss that briefly, or
I would say yes, just because have it more open, but all members who have their own like system still have to have some kind of guidance or adopt the same rubric. So basically tell them what they expect from the community who gives them problems, or like addresses.
do you sort of agree with that, Nadia?
No, I think, well, I agree totally on the openness. And so I'll speak maybe experientially. My experience is that if someone is wanting to make a case for something,
Yeah.
and there's people around it who want to work with them on it, I don't think we should prevent that from happening, at least in the sense of raising it and exploring it, right? My second feeling is that sometimes also, like, one side of this is for it to end up on the circle board, let me just think through this for a second. For it to end up on the circle board, it might also be something that is raised by a community member who has no intention of solving it, but wants attention to it. And in that sense, like right now, for example, there's someone who's raised to me something they'd like to go on the board that has to do with the scope of challenge teams and the potential for challenge teams. It doesn't go under any of us. It's not specific to the community advisor or VCA role, but it's something that's part of the process. And from a rep perspective, if it were like something to do with funded proposals, obviously I would say you should talk to Mercy about this, but there's certain things that the community might want looked at that don't necessarily go neatly anywhere else. So maybe part of that also, that being raised, the community raising something and putting it forward as a problem might be part of the clarification of things like that, where there's nothing else. There's no other like specific avenue for it. So I think keeping that as open as possible is important, and that the refinement of it and the pursuit of it will sort of do the work of that.
Yeah. Let's raise the question of, well, I mean, in theory, then, can anyone in any community raise a prioritized problem?
Prioritized problem, perhaps not, but the problem for the entry level, yes.
But then I'm just trying to figure out how it gets on, because there's the gatekeepers, if you like, are the circle reps. Yeah. So that's how we are. That's where we are at present. To get a problem on the board, you have to get a circle rep to raise the problem. Yeah. So how does that happen?
When the idea itself has gone through a specific accepted process.
No, you're getting ahead of yourself. That may be the case, but we going back to here, we identified what should be the criteria for a prioritized problem. But before that even happens, okay, I'm just saying, how does something in the various communities, which are going to have different processes, yeah, different ways of looking at things, is that just up to them to identify what is a problem? And that's the first thing, and the response to that seems to be yes. Is that right? And then, but secondly is, okay, if each community or subcircle can decide in whatever way they want to put forward a problem, they still have to go through a circle rep.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have the option for the raising of issues. So I think anything should definitely be able to be raised on issues. And then in this particular example, like what I've been doing, I don't get too many from the community where they say, I want it on the board. Maybe that's just because we're early in the process, on the circle board, I mean. So if that happens, then I say, okay, in order for us to do that, right now I'm saying it needs to go through this rubric. Are you willing to refine that and sort of answer these questions?
Yeah.
And if someone is, that's a pretty high level of motivation, because it's not easy to do that. If you're just someone who's like, oh, this sucks and I don't like it, then that's different than someone who's like, I've really been thinking about this and I'm willing to go through that and write that out and then talk to you about it and then be a part of the conversation with it and sort of steward that conversation. So I think maybe part of that process is the rep sort of, I definitely think it's within the context of the rep role to have that conversation with the person who's raising it, either help them with or give them the rubric and whatever other things we determine are needed here. And then if they are going through that process, then sort of collaboratively they could be put on the board, and that person could be, well, that becomes a question then, because some issues in the future might, just to be as broadly applicable as possible, some people might want to raise things that are really important, but it could stay for a long time in that backlog until work is naturally done on it by a group that forms around it and does that work.
So generically, if a community member is serious about raising a problem, it should be framed according to this rubric that we're talking about. Ideally, and they should contact a rep. That's the basics, isn't it?
Yep. And maybe it could start. Maybe it could start as being a sense issue as well. People might. So the chronology of that, like, could be a sense issue. Rep sees it, reaches out to the person. That becomes prioritized problem. Or they do the rubric, reach out to the rep. There's some. I think those 3 items though could be in some way chronologically accomplished.
Yeah, I'm just trying, because it's not. Yeah. Okay. I think that has some. It does raise some. I suppose because this could be guidance we can give to other reps, Nadia, as well. So, and I suppose it's relevant because you sort of said that even though you're the CA rep, you're obviously going to identify problems that are not specifically to community advisor, are you? There are people who come along to you with just general community problems, and then it becomes, is the kind of standard behavior to say, okay, can you frame that? If you're serious about, there's a distinction between whether that's an issue or a problem. If it's a problem, or they want it to be a prioritized problem, then are we saying, then okay, that needs to be framed according to the rubric, and then you need to liaise with a rep. Yeah.
For it to make on the board, I think, yes.
Yeah, to get on the board. Now,
or a subcircle.
Or a subcircle.
Right.
Does it matter which rep? There's the issue of ownership, because I suppose that's a decision of circle, isn't it? Because once you have a problem, if you identify a problem, and let's say it's related to CA or funded proposal, subcircle, or SPOs, it doesn't really matter which rep should put it on. It's just, it then becomes the decision of circle who owns it.
I would say so, yes.
Okay.
And probably if it had a specific place, like, if someone came with a stake pool issue, I'd probably be like, have you talked to Reese? Some things would be obvious. And some things, like particularly the same with the challenge teams, or I'm sure there's many others where it's not obvious, then I think it's okay. It's tough to think through and raise an issue. So for the community perspective, whoever they felt comfortable coming to, either that person can usher them to a more appropriate rep based on category, or that person can take it up themselves, just based on the fact that there's been enough comfort to raise it with that person.
Okay. I think we have the beginnings of something there, because I want to get to, do you think that's just enough to to draft some very high level guidelines for that, like in terms of, to answer that question, because it was a question that's just come up, well, any community can decide what is a problem, okay, but once they identify it as a problem, it has to be framed according to the first 2 points of the rubric, which are relevance to the Cardano mission and then a current state and an expected state, okay. Then they need to contact a rep, and actually it doesn't really matter, ideally it doesn't really matter which rep, okay, although as you say it could be obvious who is the relevant rep, then that rep takes it to Circle, agrees to take it to Circle. Is that it? Okay.
Even if no Catalyst Circle member agrees to it, I think there is an opportunity for admin also to step in, and if that task or issue which is identified goes to the backlog, it will be sitting there every Circle meeting, and at some point they will be like, okay, what is this about? And they either remove it or start assigning stuff in.
I think the problem with that, is it the responsibility of admin to do that?
No, but they can.
What do you think, Nadia? Yeah, on the admin issue. Go on.
This is my first question is, can a Circle member veto a problem that a community member wants to put on the Circle board? I don't see why that would be. I think if someone has gone through the work to put it together and make a case for it, should go on the board as consideration. We shouldn't be the gatekeepers of problem ideas. I understand why we wouldn't put it on the board if it was like not developed or those things, but what's an example of a reason that we would say, no, this can't go on the board?
I think there's a mechanism to allow anything on the board in the first instance, Nadia. Because we're talking about an individual problem, so leaving aside the admin issue, a problem, as long as the problem gets to a rep and the rep agrees to raise it in the backlog, then it can be discussed at Circle as a problem, okay. But then I know we need to go on to discuss this, because then we'll start to discuss the actual process. Once it's in the backlog, then the question is, how does Circle decide? Well, Circle has to decide, are we going to own that problem as Circle? Yeah. And that's where the gatekeeping comes in, I suppose. If you think of it in those terms, it's like Circle will decide whether it should be on the board. Are you kind of thinking about that?
Yeah, the question of ownership, both of the, well, let's come back to this admin question.
Yeah,
so the question with admin is, does the admin team responsible for moving it from the backlog into an official?
No, I think what Tivo's saying there is, well, correct me if I'm wrong, is Circle admin people can go to Circle admin to raise problems. I don't think they should personally, but well, I don't know. Why do you say that, Tivo? Then why do you think that could happen?
More people who has access to the board and the process and know how it works. So they are like coordinators. And when I talked with Nori 2 weeks ago or something, then also mentioned that they are helping to coordinate like people with the Circle members, because it's not always easy to get contact with the Circle member. So yeah, they are the buffer layer for that, and they could also be arbitrage for the problem sensing.
My concern is that admin are administrators, so we kind of, I help with admin administration, so we help make Circle run. If we accept problems, that kind of steps over the line into a decision-making process. So that's my concern there. So isn't it up to subcircles to accept problems? Isn't that a decision of the community? Whereas circle admin is like a functional group.
Yeah, well, for me, I guess it doesn't matter who like gatekeeps and make it the most open, so they have as many like cohorts to accept a well-made issue. So if it's already goes through the rubric, it might as well like mechanically end up in the backlog. And if there is gonna be every week 10 issues there which are well crafted, then we might have to start changing the process, because now we need to kind of
exactly.
more focus on that. But right now, I don't think we need to be so worried.
I mean, well, yeah, that's another concern, is that if that kind of could open the floodgates for a lot of problems. And so you could start each circle meeting, Nadia, with a whole lot of problems in the backlog, and then a lack of clear ownership of them. You see what I mean? So if they go through subcircles, by subcircles I mean communities of each rep, then there's been some conversation beforehand.
I can see reasons for both. I think the very process of going through the rubric is a big deterrent for a lot of people having a lot of stuff on there, to be honest. And if people are serious, the rubric itself is fantastic. It would be great if we had 15 or 20 of those well-defined, thought out problems with someone who was enthusiastic about it to go through that process to put it on there. Because my experience, to be honest, is that like once you say that, people go, I'm not sure how serious I am about this thing. And if you're serious about it, you're gonna take it forward. That doesn't mean that the problem itself isn't serious. So that's another consideration. It could be that you have someone raise an issue, but not have the time or bandwidth to go through that process. And then it's more of a rep decision about, okay, does anyone else have this problem and want to take it to the rubric? I think it's important that the rep doesn't do that work all the time, because that would make it very easy for a lot of problems to flood the board, right? With singular representation, but not a lot of actual community impetus for that to happen.
What I'll do there, because I can't, maybe I should take a note here to get feedback from admin, actually, from circle admin on that, because I'd be interested to see what they think about accepting problems and how, because I don't want to kind of jump to any conclusions. Yeah, should I do that? And
I tend to think that the 7 reps should be sufficient for the volume of problems, even when we scale, because once it gets to the refinement, it's really a matter of like having a conversation and copy pasting something under the board. It's a primary function of the rep. It's not like this is some like ancillary thing, it's like the function of the rep. So I think it's well within scope.
Also, I think if someone approaches admin, then I think it might be more appropriate for admin to approach the rep. Yeah,
that makes sense to me.
Yeah, okay.
I understand what you're saying too, Tevo, about just the functionality of getting it on there. But because it's so basic, I mean, if it's to the point that a rep is like, I can't do it in the next 3 days, could you do it, admin team, to help out and tag me in it? Like, that's different than. So I think there needs to be like a rep that is the channel that it goes through.
Okay, I'll put that in for the time being, because I think, unless you disagree, Tivo, on like
to me, it's like you're choosing like with one single path. For me, it's just, hey, here are this group, and this group. Who could you go to get the help to make your finalized problems? And they all know the answer that like they all know to either how to help you to create the idea, or show you where is the rubric, or guide you to specific rep, or also they all have opportunity to ignore you, because maybe the Catalyst admin doesn't feel that it's problematic, but they at least are professional about it and guide you to another representative or a member who could be interested carrying that forward or help. So even that is a possibility.
Okay. Okay.
So it's just capturing the people who are confused and they have the issue, they want to get it somewhere, and they're like, I don't want to like bother circle member yet, maybe, but admin feels like, okay, coordination role, but now we need to ask them if they.
I mean, how open it is, I think we can. Yeah, I mean, I think what I'm hearing is that the emphasis, I think it's coming from Nadia as well, is that it's on the rubric, it's on the framing of what is a problem. And as you say, that can act as like a filter, you know, kind of like, because it helps clarify people's mind. But also it's quite simple to put that maybe at town hall, like if you're doing a slide, if we're doing slides on this, we say to the community, you know, you can raise problems with us, community, as long as it's according to that rubric. Would that be acceptable, do you think, if you said that at town hall?
I think so, and I think it also can be like, or if you're willing to go through the writing of this, it's not everyone's skill, especially if someone for English isn't their first language, and or you know, there's lots of cases where you might need a little like guidance from that person, whoever rep you're working with or whatever official person you're working with to put the problem on the board. So I think that's important that we don't make also the rubric a deterrent, that we frame it as like a helper tool, because it is. That's the purpose of it. So, yeah.
Good point. Okay, I think we can sort of leave that then, because we've clarified some of that. And I'll write that. I'll write that up. So all this up, and we'll see where we go from that. Going back to where we were. There were three parts to the rubric. The first part is the relevance of the problem to Cardano mission. The second part is, you know, it has to have some current state and some future state. And the future state is a solution. Okay, so that's quite easily understandable, hopefully. And are there any exceptions to that before we carry on to number 3? Or is that cover all problems, do you think? Or should it cover all problems? Because the reason why we got to that really was so we don't have anything open-ended. We don't have, you know, slogans or issues or general things. We have things that can be sensed as problems and resolved. You know, so the emphasis seems to be on resolution in circle problems. Yeah. Okay. So then we come to, how do we measure the value of solving the problem? And I think in our previous discussions, it seemed to be how quantitative this should be. I mean, I imagine we might have qualitative problems, possibly, but what should be the minimum that should be quantified?
Considering the last few weeks, I actually liked the fact to see the the upvotes for the CA issues posted by the community, and I think that is a quantifiable measure somewhat, that if people react on an issue, maybe that could be something what everybody kind of gives feedback to, like they read the issue and they give the rating, importance rating.
This is a problem, not an issue, but yeah.
Exactly. I think so. Maybe one of the things is like community support for it. I know that doesn't quantify the problem being solved, but as a beginning, one of the things might be, is there a swell of community support behind this? It's an important question also for solving it, because you know, once it's on the board, it needs people to pick it up.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So you kind of using that as an example, Thibaut, that the outputs for I imagine that's part of your system, Nadia, where you look at the CA issues and do you have a petition system or something, and you have some kind of way of saying which issues are relevant to people, that kind of thing, and which ones are prioritized, I suppose, going back to the prioritized problems. But then that's ultimately up to the community, you think, Nadia, for...
Well, in this case, you know, for example, with this challenge teams thing,
Yeah.
the challenge teams problem gets raised by one person, but there's maybe echoes of this conversation in 5, 6, 10 other locations, Telegram channel, conversations, swarm conversations. So it's being talked about. And then so I just went about the work of connecting those people who are talking about it, because there you might have a little bit of a explanation of community support around something where people could work on it. So these are just like, you know, active responses to stuff. This is not like maybe necessarily the process that everyone should take. It's just simply how I've approached the building of the community support around something. What Teva was mentioning is the, you know, we had that compilation of all those different sensed issues, which is probably not the way that they would end up on, on a circle board, on our circle board, but we have all these sense issues, and then there were so many of them that we thought, how can we can't do all of them. Let's see who wants to do most of them. And so we just put it out for a vote, and people could upvote the things they thought were most important, which was very interesting, because some of the things that got talked about the most didn't get upvoted the most as things to focus on. So I think it is a good part of the refining process to see if this is there actually engagement on this, or is it,
Okay,
you know, just something that's a lot of chatter.
This is really interesting, because, okay, let's do a kind of thought experiment then. Let's say we have a problem, it's in the backlog on Circle, and one of the metrics now is let's call it a measure of community support. And that's something that we are going to measure on that problem. Is it something we measure before it's accepted as a problem, for a start, okay, by Circle? Or is it something, I'm making a distinction here, a prioritized problem's got onto the board, okay, whatever it is, and we have this list of preset metrics. The first one is the measure of community support. When are we going to measure? Are we going to measure at the beginning, the middle, the end? And what impact is it going to have on the problem? You know, so let's start with an idea. Okay, let's say we measure it at the beginning. Okay, so you put a problem on the board, Nadia, and then the first thing that happens is that Circle says, okay, let's measure how much support this is. Is that appropriate?
It's a tough question. Here's why I think it's a tough question.
Yeah.
I think in order for it to go from the backlog into to do, maybe that's the time. I don't know. It's either between the issue and the problem, or between the problem, prioritized problem, having gone through the rubric and landing on the community on the backlog and being actually actively worked on. What prevents something from going from the backlog to worked on, I think, is, or to researching, maybe that's part of that process, because I think we should make as few reasons to prevent something to come onto the prioritized problem board as possible, as few as possible. So I think the rubric itself, and having someone who's enthusiastic about it, should, if that's well done, should get it on the board itself, because then people can be also aware of it. And then people can raise their hands and say, hey, I'm really interested in that. What prompted the upvote? The fact that it was there for people to look at and be able to upvote. But if you're just like, hey, who cares about this? It's not really in an official capacity. So I think we're talking about two different things here. One thing is the substantiation and the measurement of the problem itself being worked on. And the second thing is the measurement of the problem as it's solved, the problem solution KPIs kind of a thing. So I think we're talking about two different things, and maybe the process itself for moving it across the board clarifies the questions as to upvoting and people support and all things like that, whereas the problem itself needs clearly defined expectations.
Hi, Alison. Sorry to I took a while to admit you to the room.
That's all right. I'm really sorry. I'm so disorganized.
That's okay. I mean, we have another 25 minutes or so. I suppose we could go over depending on people's commitments today.
I can't go over.
You can't. Nadia can't go over. Maybe we could have a little bit. A little bit.
Yeah, you guys can.
To recap for your benefit, Alison, we are talking about metrics on prioritized problems. So the previous week we talked about the problems rubric, the problem sensing rubric, which was 1, 2, and 3. First part of the rubric was, is it relevant to the Calaveras mission? Second part was, does it have a current state and a future state, like a solution? And the third part is, how do you measure that? So, and that's what we're discussing now. And we have focused on measure of community support. So you have a problem, and we just came through this scenario, which is based on examples of how some subcircles are dealing with issues, where they identify an issue and they vote on an issue to see how much support it has from the community. And what we're kind of brainstorming here is to see whether that could be applied to a circle meeting. So, for example, you put a problem on the board, and that's quite easy to put a problem in the backlog, but then you measure the community support before you progress the problem onwards. And that could be a form of voting, Nadia, you think? And then the question is that appropriate to do at the early stage?
And what were the initial responses to, is it appropriate to measure the community support at an early stage? We
haven't answered that question. We just got to. That's this question I'm posing. So we just described, so far we've just described something. This is based on something that's been used already. Is that D work by the looks of it?
Well, and just to clarify, I think it's rare that we'll need something like that. I hope from our standpoint also it's rare that we need something like that, because what will happen in the future is people will automatically put that as a community suggestion on a board and people can evaluate it. It's just because we didn't have the system that we did the issue sensing and we got a crop of those, and then the system was ready. And so we just migrated things. But you shouldn't have like a crop like this. So I appreciate the example. And I think it's important to think about voting for it, but I don't think that it will happen in that way often if the system is being actively used over time. Just like it is for us with GitHub right now, people could raise these community issues whenever they want. And then if someone raised it, so here's what I'm thinking. So if someone raised a community issue and then reached out to one of the reps and said, hey, this issue is happening, then the step is, okay, rubric. And then the person's like, great, then it becomes a prioritized problem. Now it's in the backlog because a rep has worked with that person or received that from that person and has come onto the log. And I think what moves it forward, practically, how can anything move forward if it doesn't have people around it who want to usher it across those stages, unless that falls solely on the rep, which I don't think is realistic for some of these scope of these things. So the generating community support is more for the support and the fulfillment of the problem being solved rather than community consensus. If it follows that if there's no community support for the help of the thing, then it won't go forward. That was a big part of this upvoting thing too. Everyone who upvotes, now the question is, okay, you see this as important. Do you want to be part of solving it? So it is also a little bit of recruitment and engagement of people as well, in addition to the feedback from the community on what's been put out there over time.
It's kind of like, is there enough investment to pursue the problem as well? There's kind of a practical element to this, Nadia, so.
Very much.
Yeah, which is interesting because that might help Circle do its work. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, because previously there's kind of maybe in Circle or in any group, it's quite difficult to get a grasp on. You have a problem, and then okay, how do we deal with it? Who, you know, it's like, you know, that kind of thing. So, as you say, the problem, the first thing well, one of the things that Circle needs to do, and this is one of the first why we're looking at this metric, is to measure how we do that. The community support. Why should we measure? I suppose this is the why. Is that because if there isn't any support, then we don't have any, or if there's a lack of support, then we have a difficulty in resolving the problem, in moving it across the board. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I would add to that. And I think that, Nadia, you're doing this very naturally for the CA role and giving not just a platform, but a process to capture and allow for community feedback and involvement. Where my focus has been, and I've beat this dead horse for a while, is that Circle members submitting proposals to work on issues and then using the platform of the Circle to promote those proposals is a difficult issue, because the risk is always that it looks like the Circle member is just using the platform of the Circle to promote their own work and ideas. And so I would say that some metric for measuring community support is really important to legitimize the work that the Circle rep is doing and differentiate it from a project or a proposal that they might be working on from their own personal standpoint, which is, I think, fine right now when we're all wearing many hats. But I think it gets, the community support issue gets to the heart of what does the Circle do? And the point of the rep role is to represent the community and work on problems that are important to the community. And how do you know what's important to the community? I think it is useful to at least have some metric of measuring why a particular problem that a rep would choose to work on or champion or promote or publicize is important to the community. And I think, Nadia, you're just way ahead in terms of having created a process that captures that quite naturally.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think though that it needs to be for Circle board problems. I don't think it needs to be, you know, what we created for the CA tools here are as a response to how that community is functioning and where the gaps are in letting it actually work on things. So it's highly responsive and specific, although I think also the process is applicable in lots of other places in a customized way. As far as the Circle board, as long as we explain this clearly and you know, I think it doesn't have to seem that complicated or develop that much further, as long as there's clear steps to the process, which is what we're doing here. So I really
yeah, okay, a couple of things to clarify, because there seems to be some consensus that, okay, at the beginning, the problem is now on the backlog, and then, okay, we're at a Circle meeting and we have to, one of the first things we're asking is, what is the measure of the community support for this problem? Okay, this is before we do anything with the problem.
And is this, where is this problem in terms of the process of the prioritized problem board?
At the moment, it's nowhere. It's just in the backlog.
Okay.
So what we discussed previously at the early part of this meeting, we discussed very a kind of the issue of how do problems get onto the board, and we kind of went down that different communities do that in different ways, Alison. But now let's just assume that the problem is now in the backlog, okay? And now we're talking about, okay, what metrics, standard metrics for every single problem that goes through Circle should we apply? And this is the first metric. There could be other metrics, obviously. So the first metric is the measure of the community support. But the question is, when do we apply that? And that's the first question was asked, should we apply it at the beginning? The consensus seems to be yes. I mean, we still haven't quite clarified how we should do that. The sense I'm getting from you, Nadia, is that that should be quite informal to begin with, maybe. How formal, informal do you want that measurement to be? You know, Like, for example,
It could simply be there are 6 people right now who are interested in this.
right.
So
you
for
have-
the CT thing, it's like these 7 people's names, ding, 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 are interested in ushering this forward as a sort of what I would come to call like a subcircle, but maybe it's like a team of champions or whatever. Like, we should figure that, like, let's not officially use any of that terminology, but this group is raising this issue, or this person who's raising this issue has the swell of support from this group to be able to work on these things.
Okay. So
Yeah,
we'll-
and
Yeah, go
I
on.
wanted to clarify 2 things. One, I don't think that any one particular measure of community support should be necessarily defined. I just wanted to say that I think some measure of community support is important for things to occupy the resources of the broader circle. So I think that any 7 people could get together and work on a problem. I mean, that's what's so wonderful about Catalyst. Anyone can see a problem and attempt to solve it. But I think the question is, what does the circle spend its limited resources on working on together? And that's where I was saying that I think it's helpful to differentiate between what might be somebody's personal, albeit entirely legitimate agenda, versus an agenda they're representing in their role as a circle rep for their particular constituents.
Yeah, there's kind of a general agreement that a problem shouldn't be just arbitrary. It shouldn't be just a circle rep who's just come up with that problem themselves. That's the kind of backstory we have here. It should be coming from some sort of problem sensing. Yeah. Then, but what I'm hearing from you, I kind of agree, but I'm seeing what Nadia thinks. The measure should be we shouldn't be too prescriptive with the measure then. Okay, because we get different sorts of problems. It could be a few people, it could be a lot of people, it could be a group who's raised the problems, it could be a number, maybe not a specific number, but it has to be, is what we're saying, there has to be some measure. So if you're putting the problem on the backlog, this could become like a standard part of the process, Nadia. So it's in the backlog, and then it'll come around to you, and Circle Admin or Nori will say, what's the measure of community support? And you will say, the measure is this number, these names, this group, that kind of thing. Is that?
Yeah, or this very highly motivated person. So yeah, I totally
Yeah.
I totally think that's good, because it should be a consideration. Yeah, so I like that.
A question though for you, Nadia, I'm curious, you're much closer now to the circle work than I am. Do you think one highly motivated person with a problem is enough for a circle rep to focus on that problem and move it forward? Or is there an idea that broader community support is important? And I'm honestly asking the question.
I think I'm at the point right now where I'm starting to figure that out, to be honest, because it is sort of like, and I also think that's a good argument for 6 months versus 3, because I would not have, by the time you get to that point. So yeah, I would say I'm starting to figure that out. It could also be that one highly motivated person, the next researching work is finding other people who are interested in it, and that would be my response then. There's one very motivated person, and there's a sense that it's a community important issue, and that person is going to take on, or the rep with that person. That becomes a question of scope of the rep then.
Yeah.
I think if that person's ready to go out and look and find support, then that's worth it.
It's also, should there be consistency between the reps? Like, for example, I can think of one motivated person who consistently gets just one person supporting that, and that's IOG. IOG is one motivated person who just puts problems coming from one motivated person to all intents and purposes. I know there might be a team behind Harris and all that, but that's the conduit. Okay, so should it be should it be the same for every single, if you think of the community reps, like the CAs, the SPOs, the funding proposers and all that, is that a different case? Should it be consistent between all those reps, Nadia, so that they have an obligation, because they do have communities, okay, to say, okay, I've had one really motivated person from the CA community come to me. Now, that's okay. It might be a great problem and everything, but we really need to establish broader support here. Is that the first thing that you should ask?
I think that any of us could answer that, because all of us have sat in this role. So I'm like very welcome to either of you to speak to it. I don't know. I mean, if IOG put the problem on the board, isn't it as a response to the community wanting it put on the board? So in that sense, you're still measuring. It's not that Harris, because he is a sole representative of an entity that doesn't raise a lot of issues. The community raises the issues. So if it comes to Harris would have that same question, right?
Yeah,
as I would.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, that's kind of why a bit of a provocation. Sorry. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's because all these metrics should be applied to all problems equally.
It's not fair that you're leading me this early in the morning, Stephen.
I'm
okay?
sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm not awake enough to be aware that I'm being led and directed down paths. Okay.
It was my secret plan. It's pre-coffee, Nadia.
Yeah, it's a good plan. It's an Achilles heel of a plan.
Yeah, I have to remember that in future. So, no, that's unfair. Yeah, but the
wait, are you alternating? Do you have two different coffee mugs there? Sorry, what's going on?
One is water and one is tea.
Okay.
I need to be hydrated.
So
the sun wasn't up yet. Okay.
I'm sorry, Nadia. I shouldn't have organised this meeting.
It's totally good. It's all fine.
Yeah,
it's good. I don't think there's any other time that would have worked for all of us this week, so it's good we got it in. I will give you a hard time about it though.
I can rely on you to do that. That's fine.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll arrange the next meeting, because we probably should have these roughly once a week or so. I'll arrange the next meeting today for next week. Then maybe we can arrange a better time for all of us. We seem to be going between Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesdays, so maybe we could do that for next week. I'm running the last 7 minutes because you have to go in half the hour. Yep. But we have done something quite interesting here, which is a metric. We've identified a metric, one metric for a prioritized problem. And one interesting thing here is the consistency issue. It should equally apply to all reps.
Well, and that's where I was thinking from the general ADA holder perspective. I do see a potential danger where it's so hard to represent that community that one motivated person bringing an issue to the general ADA holder rep could be something that absolutely does not interest or motivate or touch the rest of the community. And so how the general ADA rep can navigate that and what kind of prescription the process has for measuring community support, I think is a tricky one for that role, particularly speaking from my own personal experience.
This is the kind of definition here, this orange sticker. So I'll try, we maybe need to, so it has to be some measure of support and it has to be something identified. Okay, so that means it could be a number, and also you'd have to justify that. So if Nadia came on and said, oh, I have 20 people who, then if I said to Nadia, do you have evidence of that? Then you could provide evidence of that. Okay, or likewise with a name or a group. You can't just say, I spoke to these people and that's it. That's not good enough. Would you say?
I mean, I would agree with that. I think that for the sake of having legitimacy, being able to document where the problem is coming from and what the community support is and how it's measured without being prescriptive, but having some ability to provide legitimacy through some form of documentation seems to make sense to me.
Do you all agree with that? Or legitimacy requires evidence of community support? Or is there any exceptions to that? Or
Yeah, and then it'll be case to case, because 10 people who all raise their hands might not be as involved as 3 people who raise their hands, right? So volume of people, like, it's just simply to say, have we asked this question? Have we explored this? And when we go to move this across the board, who are the people we're going to be asking about what has been accomplished in order to migrate it to the next phase? So,
and I think that's the great thing about Catalyst, just in general, but the circle role and particularly, great. I heard you, that's a problem. What are you going to do about it is the next question.
okay, I'll start to
Maybe
find it.
phrased more
And
nicely
that
than that.
kind of reaches to the question I put in the purple, how to measure if the problem is healthy, and to say that, okay, we have something to measure, we have a goal, what is the next step? And then if the next step is scribbled down, let's say in 1 month, when the people forget about it, come back to this board, they have these names on top or sign, they could say, ask them, is this done? Or somebody has to go into and do a bit of audit, and is that next step done, or how far into your progress? And if no, somebody has dropped the ball, then I guess you will say that it's not healthy problem, and now it either has to be moved back to the backlog, reassigned, or moved forward even.
I mean, I'll start to wrap up because I know Nadia, you have to go soon. So to conclude, thanks everyone. This has been great because we've actually identified the first metric here. I'll write this up and we'll tweet about it and everything. We'll obviously need to return to this in the next session because we can't, there are obviously going to be other metrics. If I could ask everyone to think about, if I just stop the screen share for the moment, but so if I ask everyone to think about what metrics there should be for prioritized problem. So we have community support, and we need to return to this at our next section to see, and obviously we don't need too many metrics, but we just need enough so that the prioritized problem, measuring the prioritized problem, is meaningful.
Yeah, and I would say off the top of my head, we can discuss more next time, that something around the possibility of addressing the problem is another critical metric. Is it something that's within our control as a community at this point in time?
I'll put that as a note, and then I'll, for the sake of the recording, I'll just stop the recording here. We can continue on an informal discussion after this. I'll just stop recording here.